Professor Ahmed.
Thank you, Arif. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you very
كيفك
much.
بابا؟ ممكن the wealth of knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank you and to thank the Sudanese Doctors Union in UK for this kind invitation to participate in this very important meeting. And I'm very privileged and delighted to be with also Zeinab Badawi, who is يعني really managed to make very great effort visiting 34 countries, Africans, and met with archaeologists and maybe also anthropologists, and even digged out information and meeting with directly with natives from different tribes and different areas. What I would like to just ask, I know that this will be a very good, very good contribution to all involved in different sectors. But eventually, I would like to see whether she felt, or Dr. Zainab, do you agree with me that visiting 34 countries may be a very good source for another book on things behind the other than the very important data that you have collected? And also, I would like to know if you have, of course, this kind of experience will be very entertaining and very nice, and will give also very good information. But I would like to know whether you have had one of the objectives that you did not fulfill, things that you faced with some obstacles, some challenges that you did not manage to bridge. This is one of the things that I wanted to know. In addition to a very important thing that I think, Africa, Africa is poor country, is poor continent. Why? Is this something inherited in the since very long time that have been lost in the prehistory with regard to any information that you have collected that led to this exploitation of some nations to Africans? What was behind this very long term? Is it just the color of the people, or there are many other things that the Africans themselves assisted in bringing this kind of unfair life? I'm very looking forward to see and to know the secrets of the old Timbuktu. Thank you very much, Zainab.
Interesting that you say that, because I am very keen for my next project to embark on African history through an economic lens and to address precisely what you have just said. Because I have found that on my book tours, a lot of people, yes, are interested in the history, but they also want to know about Africa today and why it is the poorest continent in the world, as you say. And you know, I would like to get to the bottom of this and or at least explore some of the issues. But my view is that before the arrival of the Europeans, Africans, you know, Africa is a very rich continent, blessed with many natural resources, and it provided its people with everything they needed. You know, the climate was quite favorable. It's not like Europe where they had to build warm houses and fires and things, you know, and invent many things, because necessity is the mother of invention. Africans really benefited from the bounty of their land, and so their lives could continue uninterrupted, you know, the way that they had for many years. And also Africa was remarkably free of conflict, actually. You know, there's never been a war fought between Africans based on African religions. If you look at the Europeans, you know, I'm not even talking about, you know, different Christians, the Crusades with the Muslims or whatever. I'm even talking about, you know, Christians fighting Christians with the wars of religion in Europe and so on. Africa, You know, history that's free of conflict is often just overlooked. And Africa has been a remarkably conflict-free continent throughout its history. The arrival of the Europeans, I think, did disturb the continent, and certainly economically, they set it on a path from which it is really still recovering. I mean, I always say that the colonial legacy gave Africa a bad hand, but African leaders have made a bad hand much worse. They could have made it much better, but they've made it much worse. So there are external and internal factors that are at play. And I think that, you know, the way, obviously, the transatlantic slave trade did not affect all parts of Africa, nor did the Arab slave trade or the Eastern slave trade affect all parts of Africa. But I think the enslavement of Africans in such great numbers must surely have a role to play. So if you look at the transatlantic slave trade, 12.5 million Africans taken from the continent. The Arab Eastern slave trade, the Arabs and their partners, like some of the Swahilis and so on, from the 8th century to the 19th century, 14 million Africans were either, mostly 10 million were taken across the Indian Ocean to the Gulf, to Oman and places like that. The other 4 million across the Red Sea or trans-Saharan trade from sub-Saharan Africa to the Arab countries in the north, because not the Arabized Africans in the north, because the Arabs conquered most of North Africa by 711, very early, and they settled and intermarried with the local urban communities and so on. So I think that the enslavement of Africans really, you know, when you rob a continent of its strongest and its best and its most productive, it has an impact. By 1850, the population of Africa was 100 million. It would have been 200 million had there been no transatlantic slave trade. So that's a figure for that one. So I think that had an impact. And then when the Europeans stopped and North Americans and South Americans stopped taking Africans out of the continent, they left them in the continent because they wanted their resources, the rubber, the palm oil, to oil the wheels of industry. And so again, African productivity and labor was not geared towards building its own countries, and not countries that didn't exist then, but their own, places, but to develop peoples outside. And, when you look at that, and then, of course, the colonial legacy, these economies had been set up like that. It was very difficult for Zambia to try and change from being a copper producer, difficult for, I don't know, Sudan with its cotton or whatever to move away from that. So because the infrastructure had been laid in place, the ports to take products out. And Africa is still struggling really to make to diversify their economies. By and large, the continent is still an exporter of raw materials and fluctuating commodity prices, and the importer of more expensive finished goods. So, Nigeria has so many tomatoes, one of the biggest producers of tomatoes in the world, but one of the biggest importers of tomato puree and paste from Italy. Mangoes or whatever, but import mango juice from outside. The story is always the same for Africa. Oil producers, and then they have to export the raw material and then import the much more expensive refined material. So Africa this is one of the biggest problems for Africa. Its economies are not industrialized. And that is partly because of the legacy of the colonial powers. And people say, oh, you can't blame colonialism 60 years later, but it takes a long time to shift, countries away from a path that they were on for a century or more. And also, nation building came very late to Africa, until the Berlin Conference in 1884 to 85. There were no African countries, maybe Egypt, a couple of others, but most countries were created as late as 1884-85, when the European powers just said, okay, you have this, we will have that, principally Britain and France. So when you have countries that are arbitrarily created, you know, cutting across ethnic lines, nation building becomes a big exercise. And, you know, again, that's in very, very recent history. 1885 is not that long ago. So the, you know, newly independent leaders in the 60s mostly had quite a task trying to build some kind of cohesion. And studies show that countries which had violent struggles for independence continued on that violent trajectory. Countries which didn't had a more peaceful, you know, transition, by and large, developed much better. So, for example, Ghana, much more peace, you know, better off and much more peaceful than, you know, I don't know. I mean, Algeria, you know, is relatively authoritarian. It had a very violent, you know, birth, and it had the, you know, the wars with the GIA, the Armed Islamic Group, and so on and so forth. So I think that, and then today in the modern era, you see that, you know, Africa is a junior partner when it comes to how the global economy functions, and it's hard for Africa to overcome that. You know, getting there, African Union is now a member of the G20. You've got Ethiopia and Egypt that are members of the BRICS nations. So things are changing. There are more partners for Africa to choose from, not just the old European powers. You know, there's Russia, China, you know, Turkey. Turkey's a massive player in Africa. And these countries are good and bad, but you know, you're right. I can't deny that Africa is, you know, still very much on the margins.
Yeah.
But I'd like to go into this much deeper and maybe write a book about this.
We have a question from Nuha. Nuha, I'll allow you to speak just a second.
Okay, thank you very much, Zeinab.
Thank you.
Hello, Nuha.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Zeinab, and thank you for all the professors in the meeting. My question to Zeinab is, writing this book and diving into the African history, did you feel that this gives you an insight on ideas how to solve our problems of inequality and how the ancient Sudanese or the historical Sudanese and the Kushis and Kandakas, how did they solve their inequality of accessing resources or like distances from the Nile and things like that, that may give us insight into how we solve our modern problems, if we may say.
I mean, I think generally drawing on tradition, you know, traditional systems of justice, like the Rwandans did with their Gacaca system after the genocide there. You know, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa also drew on Southern African traditions. So I think that, you know, Africa needs to find African solutions to its problems and challenges, using its, you know, the traditions, its customs, and integrating these with, you know, more modern notions of justice, like, you know, what the International Criminal Justice System might say in terms of development. You know, the community is very, very important in Africa. In the West, you tend to focus much more on the individual, and a family is much more a nuclear family, you know, mother, father, and children, and that's the unit. Whereas Africans are much more community driven. You know, they'll look after their elderly, they won't lose contact with their aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents and that kind of thing. So I think that if we can renew, you know, what the Southern Africans call Ubuntu, you know, I am because of you, I think that would be a much stronger basis for overcoming Africa's problems and certainly issues of inequality, because you know, that I think this community spirit is critical to righting many of the wrongs of society. I mean, I don't want to be starry-eyed about everything that Africans do, because obviously there's some bad stuff too. But I do think that if countries approach it with an idea of having within their own country, because there are different ethnic communities, having a community made up of communities would be a very good approach. We can't hear you, Sarah.
I've been checking the comments on Facebook, and Dr. Ahmed Al-Laythi has written, in my opinion, African historians' engagement in writing African history is a transformative process that redefines the continent's past and helps shape its future. It challenges stereotypes, empowers communities, and provides a richer and more accurate account of Africa's place in global history. What do you think, Dr.? What do you think, Zeinab?
I agree totally. I agree totally. This idea that, you know, African history is for Africans actually alone, what we must understand is that African history is part of our global story. It's everybody's history. If you want to be an informed or educated person, then you should know something about African history, especially since everybody originated from Africa anyway. You know, I would say, don't you want to know the history of the continent of your birth? You know, there's nobody on earth today who can't say that Africa is not their mother continent. It's, you know, the science is settled. Africa is where the human story begins. And therefore, I think, you know, African history is for everyone, which is what I say in my book. And of course, it is part of our global story for sure. So I agree with that comment.
My question, I'm a graduate source myself.
I missed that.
I'm a graduate of SOS. I did
Oh,
my
wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful.
and I'm very proud that you
Yeah.
are the president of SOS right now.
Oh, I'm so
Question
glad.
is, my question is, I mean, you in your speech, you talked about how can we help the Sudan.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Do you have graduates from SOS, Sudanese graduates, and other graduates? Do you have a list
Of
of those?
Sudanese. We have Dr. Nada Ali, who's one of our lecturers in human rights at SOAS, and she's very active. We've got some Sudanese students. Did you say specifically Sudanese and
No. I mean the graduates of SOAS.
Oh, yes, we do. We do. And, you know, we're going to draw them into this diaspora initiative, but I'd love the diaspora initiative to be right across, you know,
Okay.
entire diaspora communities. I don't know how we can effect that, or whether there's a you know, a USA chapter that we could have, and a you know, UK one and French one and so on.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in the US, it is extremely partitioned and parceled. You have the professionals that they have their own, and they're very active. Maybe the key word that you said at the beginning, Zainab, was the one that really should resonate, which is, you know, okay, if we leave politics alone and focus. I mean, this is also, unfortunately, what's happening in Gaza. You know, the idea of not so much the warring factions, but the civil death and hunger and miseries. This is what we should focus all on. And I think the doctors, even here in the United States, they're very active in extending and reaching out, extending a hand, and they're very courageous. You know, like, you know, Saba, for example. You know, and I'm sure, like, you know, the most of the doctors based in the United Kingdom and Ireland do a great job also.
Yeah, they do, and they own humanitarian activities. which of course they can continue and they can do those as they have been doing them. But what I mean is to coordinate on a kind of charter of demands to the international community, so that, you know, we try and see action at the international level, at the UN, in Brussels, in, you know, capitals, you know, London, Paris, these are members of the Security Council, to overcome the deadlock that we have at the Security Council, because Russia and China veto everything. If you keep it humanitarian, it's going to be quite hard for Russia and China to veto, just to try and get some kind of coordination. As I said, why do the UN and the AU have differing points of view? This is going to affect any efforts at trying to find a peaceful resolution. And I'm not saying enter into the negotiations or anything, but just to try and get influential diasporas members behind a kind of charter saying, you know, do we discuss having, where there are pockets of safety in the conflict, to have safe havens, which may be, you know, have civilian protection forces, have a protection force of some kind for civilians. Do we try and see if we could get a no-fly zone, no drones or anything over these particular havens? Who might provide the boots on the ground? You know, that kind of thing. Who would pay for the boots on the ground? You know, the UN doesn't want to go in as a peacemaker right now because it's the whole country is up in arms. But if there are little pockets, you know, I believe if you get your foot in the door and just get your foot down, you can expand then, once you've got the principle there. Do you know what I mean? And if you say, okay, they're not peacemakers here, because I can understand the peacekeepers don't want to become parties to the conflict and become seen as another set of combatants. But if there are areas which are relatively safe, then you can designate them safe havens. You know, what was the experience in Srebrenica and Rwanda with the safe havens? Why did they fail? What can we do to ensure they don't? You know, to really have a proper brainstorming, you know, informed by experts, and say, these were the pitfalls in Srebrenica. The UN gave up and didn't try to protect the Bosnian Muslims. We can avoid these, you know, what can technology do to help us? Satellite imagery, whatever. I don't know, I'm not an expert in those things, but there'll be an engineer or somebody with technological experience or knowledge amongst us in the diaspora who can run with that particular part. So we say, you know, the Sudan Diaspora Charter says you can effect small pockets of no-fly zones in this way and that. Of course, SAF, who've got an air force, will say no, but then the Rapid Support Force also have drones which come under the range of no-fly zone. But I think the main thing is just to be neutral, to say to both SAF and the RSF, a plague on both your houses. We're not interested in the politics. We just want to help our fellow Sudanese who are suffering at the moment. We're not interested in whether you're talking to one another, who should be president, who should be that. We just want to focus on the short term, because the short term is dire. And then, you know, I think to start it like that, who can argue against that?
Yeah, right.
I had a brief question. I recall when I was a student back home in Sudan, we studied history, obviously, but I always felt that the history of Sudan wasn't taught comprehensively, let alone Africa. Do you think we could see a version of your book for the youngsters, or in a form, not only a book, or in a form of media that they can absorb easily?
That's kind of you say. I am actually writing a children's version of my book. I'm starting to do that. So my publishers at Penguin have asked me if I would be able to do that. So I will make something that's available for the younger reader. And, you know, and I say, you know, I could only give snapshots of the history. The idea is just to excite people into wanting to find out more. And there were many other parts of Sudan's history that I could have covered, you know, early on, you know, the Funj sultanates in the west, you know, in the east and so on. I just focused on the Kushites because we have the monuments to see. You have the pyramids, 1,000 pyramids in Sudan, 100 in Egypt. 250 of them preserve their superstructure in Sudan. You've got the temples, the statues, the monuments. So that's why I focused on that, because some things, it's not that they weren't there, but they've been eroded through time, you know, other edifices. So I think the challenge is to try and have more comprehensive histories of regions. But I also wouldn't say that a Kenyan should only study Kenyan history and a Sudanese only Sudanese history. I think it's good to have a Pan-African approach to the study of the history.
Yeah.
Just like Britons know about ancient Rome, it's Southern Europe, they're Northern Europe, an island off Northern Europe, but they know about Greece and Rome because it's part of their kind of, you know, heritage, they see it. I'd like that Pan-African approach to history.
Okay. I have a few comments on Facebook that I'll go through. So Dr. Ahmed Al-Laisi said the impact of African historians in writing history is profound. Reshaping how Africa is understood is both within the continent and globally. Few key impacts: correcting misrepresentation and stereotypes. 2, reclaiming African agency. 3, emphasizing ingenious knowledge systems. Number 4, encouraging historical continuity and cultural pride. Number 5, fostering Pan-Africanism and unity. 6, impacting global perceptions and scholarship. And 7, influencing policy and development. And 8, addressing the legacy of colonization and slavery. And Amal Al-Khatim said very interesting for the podcast, for the webinar. So
yeah, but this person with their 8 points, absolutely, I could not agree more. And that's why I think, you know, history is, you know, a historian can be an activist, as Professor Hassan knows. You know, the activist, the historian as activist, it's very important. And I think that all those points come out of history, and particularly not just the history, but saying the history has to be written by the Africans themselves. If you look at the World Bank today, the chief economist of the World Bank, who's a Kenyan, told me that 0.5% of research papers about Africa on which the World Bank bases its decision are written by Africans. That means 99.5% of the research papers and data gathered about Africa on which the World Bank decides on who gets this loan or that program or whatever are written by non-Africans. This is the same picture as, you know, the writing of history. So you have to correct it on all fronts. So it is about agency in all ways. I absolutely agree.
yeah, so that was our president of the union, Dr. Ahmed Al-Laisi. So thank you.
Completely agree with him. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments from the panelists?
Yes, I just want to chain on what you have suggested. I don't know how to. I'm talking here about your earlier point on these havens, these pockets, these islands that we might find, can protect and protect civilians in them. I don't know then how to be done. I mean, we need a coordination, a really wonderful coordination body, but it has to exist.
It has to, because otherwise the alternative is we just sit on our hands and say how terrible it is what's going on in Sudan. Even if we fail, let us try. But I think that, you know, it's if we can provide some kind of safe havens where people might feel if they can get to it or whatever, and, you know, if we can do it with a, you know, UN resolution or whatever, and, you know, make pariahs of people who oppose it. We have to sit. We've got, as I said, a whole body of expertise in the Sudanese diaspora. You know, and I would put things like justice on the back burner. You know, let's get peace before we start talking about justice. You know, people want to do too much in one go. Let's get them talking and so on. But it's more than 18 months now, and we've got nowhere, and the situation is getting worse. We either keep on hoping that the two warring parties will come together and talk and just hope, but it might take another 3 months, 6 months, another year, we don't know. Conflicts in Africa can go on and on. In Somalia, it's gone on for a long time. Or we really make a concerted effort and sit down and just say how. And, you know, I would suggest that we have chapters, a steering committee made up of chapters from the Sudanese diaspora, where we meet regularly on Zoom. Zoom works very well indeed. and we have an expert in that particular field address us about just, what are the pitfalls, what are the possibilities, what are the challenges, get somebody, from, as I said, Britain is the pen holder for resolutions on Sudan at the Security Council. Get somebody from the UN mission, British mission to the UN to address us on a webinar and just drill them and ask them, why is this? Why is that? If the UN recognizes Al Burhan as head of state, does that compromise Britain's, position vis-a-vis trying to find a solution or whatever? If the UN says that, does it mean that countries are bound to also follow, or can they do their own thing? Answers to all these questions, and just have a piecemeal approach like that and see what we can do. And then also, if we need a humanitarian appeal, just a few trucks going across the border to Chad is not going to help. It's going to help, but it's not the only solution. Talk to UNHCR about the refugees and blah, 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 but just to build up a picture so that we have a few bullet points that we can present, but under each bullet point is real proper research that we have thought about, all these points that we're asking about. So if somebody says, so it can't be done because of this, that, or the other, we say we've thought about that, but actually this is the situation. Do you see what I mean? Because every time you mention somebody, I was with a major Western European leader about 3 weeks ago, and, was talking to them about Sudan and so on. Oh, there are many problems in Africa, this person said. I won't say who it is because it's a public seminar. Oh, there are many problems in Africa. I think Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the WHO, was right when he said about a month ago that there is a kind of acceptance of African suffering, to the level where you wouldn't tolerate it anywhere else. 150.
It's always existed. It's not new. Yeah. Yes. Since slavery and and beyond. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that, for those of us who have a voice, and I certainly do, and those of us who have some, power, and this isn't even about resources, this is an advocacy role I'm saying. It's not about, donations or anything like that. It's just saying, let's bring our brain power together to work something out. So Dr. Hussam from the Sudan Doctors Human Rights Organization, you know him, Sarah, don't you? So he convened a very good meeting this week at SOAS, and we're going to set up a WhatsApp group, but we'd like to set up with chapters elsewhere. And the North American one is a powerful diaspora. I don't know if you, Arif, would be interested in, talking with us, or
I would love to.
Yeah.
You have my contacts, and I would love to. And
Sarah, will you
because
send it to me? Will you send it to me, please? His email and his WhatsApp.
I would love to. Yeah. Because most of or some of what you've just mentioned are happening. We send our reps, we send our senators, and they're all useless. I mean, they give us, and definitely right now it is voting time, and it's all being so much politicized. And Sudan, as you said, they're indifferent.
Yeah.
AKA also they don't care. I mean, there is a Middle East that is really of interest, and the criminal Netanyahu is basically he's. I don't want to politicize the thing, but what I'm saying here is it would be good to bring everybody together, and a concerted effort is much better than individual kind of messages.
And with specific demands, but not just to say, oh, stop the war in Sudan and you must do this, but proper specific demands, which, you nail them down on, because I find there's a lot of lip service when I talk to politicians. Oh, yes, it's terrible, MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed, when he visits America now, yes, Biden and Kamala Harris will say to him, stop supporting the Rapid Support Force in Sudan, whatever. and they say it to make a point because the human rights organizations tell them to, but then, you know, there's a lot of, oh, it's an important trading partner and this, that, and it's the same with our politicians here in Britain. You know, they pay lip service to what's going on in Sudan and say, yes, yes, I'm saying how terrible it is and there's not enough of a humanitarian response. But it falls to us to really come up with a proper humanitarian response. And to, you know, people can be working on in the background on justice if they want, you know, the human rights lawyers on how you're going to bring these parties, you know, to justice when the war is all over. But really, these discussions at the moment are a little bit fruitless, in my opinion, because the country is burning and we don't have the luxury of time to discuss these things.
Absolutely.
And even, you know, just saying, well, Geneva convened and RSF turned up, but SAF didn't turn up. So, you know, you do that, but okay, let's take them out of the picture and just work directly as civilians who are not affiliated to parties and just work directly on behalf of fellow civilians in Sudan.
I agree. I agree
That's
fully.
the only thing. No politics in this Sudan Diaspora Charter.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
nobody who's tainted by political office. That's why I think if it's doctors and architects and, you know, broadcasters,
Very important,
educators
yeah.
who are involved, and we just say it's, and not even the political civilian forces necessarily, you know, because then it becomes, oh, it becomes partisan. So it's a non-partisan, non-affiliated. Clean skin is what we want. So if you're very overtly affiliated with any particular political grouping and known to be so, then I would suggest that, you know, you just kindly cheer us from the sidelines and let the non-partisan lot get on with it.
Yeah. 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 I
I
mean,
think that would be the only requirement, in my opinion, because otherwise it will very quickly get bogged down into politics.
yeah. Yeah.
Don't you think? Don't you agree?
I agree totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Prophet Jamal has a question, so
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Sarah. No, it is just crossed my mind from the song African Shave is like a question mark. So it is a question to Zainab. I think that Sudan is one of the countries where the women education have started very early, and very it has had very significant progress through years. But, and this is very important, but as they say, I don't see that in the life of people, maybe the political, for example, the political parties. You don't find many women participating in the development and in the challenges of Sudan. Also, we have not seen since independence. There is no lady from Sudan governed the country.
Yeah.
So what is behind this? Because I have witnessed this for a long time, observing from education, where I have as my capacity as a professor in Ahfad University, and also as a dean of faculty of pharmacy in the National University, and I have seen that the students, the females, are very much exceeding the number of males. But when you come to the position, the higher representation of the political parties and those who now talk about Sudan, and you find that the contribution of Sudanese females is less than expected from their. We have the fairest judge, maybe in the Arab world. We have the fairest pilot, female. We have, etc. So, what do you think that what is behind hindering the to show the capabilities of females in Sudan?
Yes, I mean,
And is this maybe answer to maybe the conflicts that are now Sudan facing?
yeah, I think all conflicts in the world, I think if women controlled all the levers of power in the world, there'd be no conflict. I'm convinced of that. I really think so. So, I mean, you know, you're right. There have always been a very sort of strong cohort of highly educated Sudanese women, but they don't generally assume positions of political leadership. I think that, you know, the northern Sudanese elite who have dominated the politics of the country really since independence or since always, I think they tend to follow, you know, the Arab ideology much more than the African ideology in a way, because you have had some African leaders who are women, and Rwanda has more women parliamentarians than anywhere else in the world. And I think that if you look at the Arab world as a whole, there are no women leaders really at all. And I think that this is where, you know, the politics of Sudan traditionally, you know, have been more inspired by, you know, Jamal Abdel Nasser than Kwame Nkrumah, for example. Although obviously both were Pan-Africanists. But I mean, I personally don't like this division between the so-called Arab North and the rest of the continent, especially for we Sudanese, because we sit on the crossroads of it. It's all one Africa, really. And these kind of differences are very superficial. But I think that it may have something to do with the fact that, you know, the Arab world, including the northern Sudanese elites, tend to relegate women more to the background when it comes to political leadership for some reason. Women everywhere, I suppose, are more weighed down by bringing up the families. And so politics is a very demanding, you know, role. So, but I think that the dynamics of power are more subtle, though. I think that if you don't look at, you know, apart from women in positions of strong, former positions of power, I think Sudanese women probably do play a much more active role in society than a lot of other women in the world, following on from, you know, their history. And all African women, really. I think this idea that African women are sort of downtrodden and, you know, subjugated by, you know, forces and so on, is not particularly true. If you look at the market women, they're all women in Africa. And they're the main farmers, and any surplus they have, they go and sell it in the market, and they use that money for themselves and for their children. They don't even need the money from their husbands or the fathers of their children. You know, it was always like that, and it still is. So I think that politics aside, women do play an important role in the countries. But yes, I mean, it is important to try and encourage women to go into, you know, positions of leadership.
I can see that Facebook is starting to pick up, and we have like 3 people who have asked questions. I don't know, do we have enough time to ask these questions?
We'll answer those, and then that
we close. Okay, thank you.
the conversation, though.
Yes. So the first question is from Amal Al-Khatim Abdullah. She asked, thanks everyone. I really enjoyed. I guess I would like to know, what does the panel think about the barriers preventing Africans themselves, and especially Sudanese, from engaging with their own history and using their own resources going forward? Thank you for the very valuable meeting.
Professor Hassan, why don't you answer that? Now, I've answered everything. So,
Amal Al-Khatim.
Or Arif, yeah, because it's
Yeah,
a panel.
yeah. Why are we not engaging in our own history?
Yeah.
Well, why do you think so?
Can I ask again, please?
Amal is asking, why aren't we as Sudanese and Africans engaging in our own history? What are the barriers? And
I think Zainab answered this question because we are too much involved in politics.
yeah, thank you so much. There you go, Amal. And then we have Dr. Alethi again is asking.
Sorry, I just want to say, just add a little bit to what Hassan and Zainab said. You know, that's a very valid question. And we really have to look at in ourselves and see why isn't it possible in the 21st century that we can't work with each other. What we are witnessing right now, it is exactly because of that question.
Mhm.
And does it have to do with history? Yes, but history is not written by those who lose. It's written by those who win, and we have not been winners so far. Um, we do not know how to work with with each other. I mean, as Zainab said, like, leave this question of who you are, where you came from, and so on and so forth, and think only of uh, who it is, like, that we're dealing with, and can we have a one goal, right? I just want to preface it by saying this very personal story about my wife who worked with this Jewish woman. And there was this boss of theirs, or the major doctor who came in, and he was rude. And my wife did not like that. And this her office mate, who's her friend, said to her, "Don't worry about it. Um, it is we hate each other, right? Because he was Jewish also. So he said, we hate each other, but we work with each other. And this is I think, what we are witnessing right now, whether it be in the Arab world or in the African world or the Islamic world, or whenever you find a conflict, it is because people cannot work with each other. And we didn't find this lock that we can basically use, the key, to open a kind of uh, work in unison and work for a goal. So yeah, I'm sorry. It's long-winded, but that's what I think.
Okay,
Yes,
the
thank
second
you.
question is from Ahmed El-Laisi. Studying African history also has the potential to contribute significantly to economic unity across the continent in ways that parallel how shared European identity, values, and history influence the creation of the European Union. Any similarities?
No, I mean, I think I addressed that slightly, that I think that a Pan-African approach to history, I think, sure, it will promote a spirit of Pan-Africanism and, undermine sort of just nations. Because, and it all fits into this idea of Africans now looking to themselves to develop. I mean, no continent or no country is being developed by outsiders. And I think that just in the way that, you can talk about European traditions and Europeans' shared history, as I said, ancient Rome and Greece and so on, and the cultural influences they had and so on. I think that we can talk about an African identity. That was the question, wasn't it? Can history be used as a tool to promote greater cohesion in the African Union, just as it has in the European Union? That was the question, was it, Sarah?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think for sure it can. And I think that, the common experiences of Africans really should serve as a much stronger rallying cry for unity than the Europeans did, because this history of oppression and colonization that all of Africa experienced, even Ethiopia, when people say, oh, it was never colonized, they fought many battles with the British, with the Italians. They were occupied by the Italians for 5 years in the Second World War. So no corner of Africa, even Liberia, which was, set up as a country for emancipated African American enslaved people, was a colonization project which was set up by the American Colonization Society. So people often cite these two countries as being exceptions, but not really when you dig deep. So this should be a real unifying factor, this shared history of colonization and oppression. And I think it's there. Mandela, when he was released from prison after nearly 30 years, the first country he visited was Algeria in the far north, from the bottom of the continent to the tip of the continent, to thank them for their support during the apartheid struggle. Now, that shows you how, the two opposite ends of Africa have come together. So recent shared history, but also the past. And I think that it should form greater ties. Sadly, I don't see that happening a lot, but we can make a start.
Okay, I'll take the final Facebook entry for the day, and this is from Dian Nourani. He mentioned a few questions, but hopefully we can. So he says, what with the media near total silence about Sudan war, mentioned as currently being the largest humanitarian disaster involving displacement of civilians? Is it to do with the general apathy perceived or perceived lack of importance of African affairs in the global north? Are the parallels in recent African affairs, Congo wars, Somalia, etc.? Are there parallels in the recent African affairs, Congo wars, Somalia, etc.?
Yeah, I think again, I address that. I don't know what the other panelists think, but I think that there is a greater tolerance of Africans suffering than others. And I think that it's not, I think the media, to be fair, have covered Sudan, not obviously as much as Gaza, because that's seen as a bigger threat to international security. But this goes to my earlier point that we have to, they won't just care for the sake of it. We have to make them sit up and pay attention by saying, look, you all care about migration. And this is where the European diaspora has more leverage than the North American one, because obviously, we're much nearer Africa. So you can kind of, ring the alarm bells more easily by saying there's a Sudanese refugee heading to your shores. If this conflict continues, it could really trigger huge numbers of an exodus, but also just to say to people, the economic costs of rebuilding Sudan, the longer the war goes on for, is going to be greater. This is going to tie up international resources even more. Try and stop it before it gets even worse. So I think, as I said, you have to not just say you should pay attention for moral humanitarian reasons. That would be nice, but it's not worked, has it? So we have to try a different strategy. But I think the person who asked the question is in right in saying that it's not ignorance, as I said, it's indifference.
That pretty much probably concludes the day. I'm sure there's so many questions, and it's such a vast topic. And given what's going on in Sudan, there is no, we don't have the luxury, as you mentioned, we don't have the luxury to sit back. We have to act now. So thank you so much for the wonderful afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ahmed Al-Jamal, Professor Hassan Ahmed Ibrahim, Dr. Arif. Thank you so much, Zeinab Badawi, for being with us today. And we're looking forward to meeting you again and for your upcoming book as well. So, would you like to say anything before closing?
No, I'll just say thank you very much, Sarah, and the SDU for organizing this. And it's wonderful to interact with the other panelist members, except I did all the talking. So the next webinar we have, I'll sit and listen much more. But thank you. It's been very, very good to interact. And Arif
we'll keep in touch.
Keep in touch and see what we can do. And
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, and apologies for the IT problems.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Assalamu. Bye-bye.